Welcome back to the Point Karting YouTube channel, and today we're going to continue with our DR Mini 18 chassis build. Today is a big day in the build because we are now going to put the seat in the chassis, and that is something that is extremely important to do just right, and we're going to walk through step by step exactly how to do that. The seat that we're going to be utilizing for this chassis comes standard with the DR Mini 18 and is a fiberglass resin composite seat manufactured by DR and IMAS Seats in Italy. The very first thing, of course, when you get a seat is go ahead and try and put it in the go-kart. So once I put the seat in the chassis, of course, I can see a couple problems. One, it's sitting fairly low, in fact, too low in this case. And the other is I have quite a bit of side-to-side play, in fact, a little bit too much. So we're going to address those two problems before we drill and mount the seat exactly where we want it. The first one that I'm going to work on and address is going to be the ride height of the seat, meaning where exactly in the chassis, height-wise, it's actually sitting. I want to simulate the ground level so that I don't mount the seat too low to where it would scrape on the track and damage the seat and eventually hurt the driver. Mounting the seat too high, I will be artificially raising the center of gravity, and I will affect the handling beyond the range of where we want to put the seat. To simulate the ground level, I'm going to use a 2x4. Now, many people will use a professional chassis jig, put it on the ground and use sprockets or what have you. I found that this method, using a 2x4 underneath the frame and using a couple clamps, is easy, straightforward, and consistent, and is my favorite method for mounting different seats. So I'll pull the seat out temporarily, bring this underneath the frame of my chassis, and then using a couple C-clamps, I will go ahead and clamp this into place. Try to avoid clamping on the brake line if at all possible. On your particular chassis, on the Mini 18, there's a nice little tab for radiators that allows me to do that. I'll bring this down like that. And now I have a simulated ground level. And when I go to put my seat back in, you'll see that now, instead of sitting too low, it's basically even with the bottom of my frame rails. And now it can't sink below that. So again, if I wanted to shim the seat and have it sit higher, I could always put either wooden shims, some people use sprockets, you could even use pieces of paper if you're really determined to do that. But now I can no longer go further down. The next thing I'll do is often with a flat bottom seat such as this, again as I pull it out you'll see it has this nice flat bottom to it. A handy little trick is to take something heavy like a lead weight, or in my case I'm going to use my drill index of drill bits to put it in the bottom of the seat just to keep the seat nice and flat and level relative to the ground so that I get it in the correct position. The next thing I need to do is solve some of the issues of the lateral play side to side. Many people, when they put a seat in a chassis, are perfectly fine with having a lot of space between the upright supports, but especially with younger children or younger drivers where you're going to be putting a lot of lead weight on the seat and where the side-to-side play of their body mass is really important to the handling of the go-kart, in my opinion, it's extremely important to have those chassis supports, those seat supports relatively close to the frame. So in this particular case, what we're going to do is use a little bit of leverage to bend the left side seat support in just a little bit, bring it just a little bit closer to our seat. And this is the kind of adjustment that if you have a larger seat, you may have to bend them outward. If you have a smaller seat, you may have to bend them inward. This is a very common thing that many people, when they're installing their first seat, may have to do. In this case, because we're using a cadet kart, I'm using a cadet size axle. So this is 30 millimeters. Iron bar, even a piece of steel conduit, a jack handle, something like that will work. It's more about having the correct leverage. So you can see here I have some plastic webbing on the outside of my axle. This is a relatively new one, so I don't want to bend it, but I also don't want to scar my chassis. So using a paper towel or a rag will also work depending on what you want to do. Go ahead and insert it between the frame rail and the seat stay. Now, depending on which way you want to bend it, you need to use a little bit of logic to think about kind of how you want to maximize your leverage. But it's going to be very important, especially if you're doing this on a kart stand, to either have one of your friends or someone else kind of help you stabilize the go-kart, because bending metal obviously is not exactly the easiest thing. But we want to make sure we stabilize against the main frame rail to increase our leverage and to make sure that we get a nice steady bend. And then find our highest point on the axle and apply some pressure. Now, if I do it from the outside, I'm not going to feel this move very much. But if I move to the other side of the chassis, brace myself in a pulling position, and place my hand on the axle here, and pull, I can see that chassis tab bending ever so slightly as I apply leverage. And we want to just pull gently and gently bring it in. We don't need to pull a lot because there is a fair bit of give in that frame member as we start to bend it. And just with that amount, I've brought that frame member in roughly to where I want it to be. Okay, we've got our seat tabs set, we have our seat in position, and we're now ready to start positioning the seat properly within the chassis. So, as I mentioned before, every chassis has unique measurements that are intended by the manufacturer to help you put the seat in the right position. So, some of those measurements basically adjust the forward to backward motion, the distance from the top of the seat to the axle, and sometimes there's a little bit of adjustment included side to side. Once I'm ready to start sizing my seat and put it in the correct position, there are several measurements depending on your chassis that you will often be provided with. If you're not sure what those measurements are, a quick Google search often will find you some of the major brands, or you can reach out to your local chassis dealer. You can always reach out to us at pointkarting.com and we'll help you find those measurements for your specific chassis. I will take this measurement from the center of the kingpin to the back of my seat. I can see there that's 90, at the center of the seat that's about 93, so I'm just a little bit far back. So I'll bring this seat forward just ever so much until I'm right where I want to be. Right there, and right there. Okay, now we have the seat in position and we're ready to mark our holes and make sure that we're ready to start drilling. When you get ready to mark your holes on the seat, it's important to start with the uppermost holes, meaning the ones furthest back on the chassis. So, get your Sharpie and bring it down and just reach through the seat holes and make some marks on the seat. And pull my weight out, pull the seat out, and get ready to drill some holes. So now I have my top holes in place and I'm ready to start putting my hardware together for the top of the seat. So with this, you'll need to find the smaller bolts, and they are going to be M8 bolts with kind of a conical head to them, and these seat washers. And also I like to use these TDC seat washers. They're really nice and wide, great for mounting a seat, and they help distribute the stress and load of the fiberglass seat really, really well when we go and mount them up. So those are something that I always like to use as well. So the very first step is basically to insert your hardware into the seat, and I'll start on the right side. I'll take my spacer, work it in between the frame and the seat, and kind of push it all into position roughly. At times, if this is fitting, you know, at all tight, then you may need to reposition these bars. But I should be able to bring my screw through and get it aligned like that. So for the bottom bolts, I've actually removed the side pod for the sake of illustration. Normally I would not do this, but just so it shows up on the video properly, I wanted to make sure that everyone can see that. So, and what we're going to go over. So with the side pod removed, I want to look at how the angle of these bottom seat supports and the bottom face of the seat actually interact. We want them to be fairly parallel. if the seat support is, depending on the position of the seat, if it's too high and the bolt is too high on the seat, that's going to put increased strain on that connection, and it's really not going to be right in the meat of kind of this material here, and it's not really going to support the seat as well. Obviously, we also don't want the seat bolt to go in there at an angle, because that will drastically modify how it supports the actual seat. So in a couple of these details, you can see here where I'm showing the angle of the bolt as I fit it up to the bottom of the seat. That's really important to get that right. And this chassis out of the box looks about right, but every now and again you get a chassis that needs a little modification, and that adjustable wrench and rag, just like we talked about before, really will be the tool that you're going to want to use. So in a case like this, it's about basically taking your seat support bolt, fitting it up through the frame from the underside, looking for the end of the bolt on the seat, and marking an X kind of right at the edge of that bolt. And that, of course, is where you're going to drill into the seat. I'll now go over to the other side, and I'll do the same. Again, crouching down at first just to make sure that how I'm positioning it looks nice and even. I've got a nice even setup so that it goes through the seat support spacers and everything really nice and neatly. And now I'm ready to go ahead and drill. Got the same drill bit as I had on the top bolts. This time I'm going to have to do it with the seat kind of in position. You can pull the seat out, but most often it's best to just do it once it's in position so that you don't have to redo that process on the top. Go ahead and take your drill, aim for the cross mark, start off slow. Once the drill begins to bite, go ahead and increase your speed. And just like before, go ahead and round that bolt, or round that hole, just to make sure it's nice and even, you don't have any excessive burrs. You may want to use a rag on the underside just to get off any fiberglass dust, anything like that. If you've gone slow enough, you haven't created a huge mess. And then repeat the process on the other side, and we're ready to install the spacers. It's time to install the bottom seat bolts. For that, we'll need our required seat washer, the long Allen bolts that come with your seat kit, which have the 5mm hex head on them for an Allen wrench, and more of these TDC seat spacers. So fold the spacer up, insert your bolts. Sometimes it can help to tip the seat up at this point, and then take your nylon seat spacers. Depending on your seat position, you may need more than 2 or 3. Bring the seat down and slide it into position. Once that's in position, go ahead and take your washer and nylock nut, thread it on the underside, and then repeat that process on the other side. Take a 5mm Allen and a 13mm wrench, tighten it up, and then tighten the top bolts, and your seat's installed.